Thank you all for being here. My presentation today, which stems from research done for my dissertation project, attempts to reimagine how rhetorical invention changes in digital contexts. The closest inventional model we have for digital compositions is choric invention. To think of something as a product of choric invention is to think more critically about the product's transformation. Digital creations are likewise informed more by the process than by the idea of an end product, given the network nature of digital composing. Something made in a virtual environment is never complete. My caveat for digital rhetoricians theorizing choric invention is that such invention is contingent on doxa. I want to thus turn our attention to doxa's role in digital composing. In this presentation, I will show that choric inventing is what happens when commonplaces get mobilized. Choric inventing is when commonplaces actually develop into a dynamic resource. To think of inventing as choric highlights the process by which doxic stuff teeters continuously on the edge of becoming an inventional tool. Therefore, I want to suggest that doxa have always had the potential to be dynamic forces, but it is the networked processing that they undergo in digital situations that has allowed rhetoricians to see and then utilize this potential. To show this phenomenon in action, I will have us look at hashtags. First, what is chora? It's described in Plato's Timaeus as characterless. Timaeus says it can only be grasped by a kind of bastard reasoning. The chora is a Platonic principle that was initially concerned with questions of beginnings, space, and the elements of the meaning-making process, and how those moments get activated and dispersed. Recently, work by Gregory Ulmer, Jeff Rice, and Thomas Rickert has shown that the chora is useful for rhetoricians. Chora provides them a theory of invention that is attuned to the network, to the embodied and unstable rhetorical activity that transgresses and regresses. Digital rhetoricians are receptive to this level of movement, which means we need to be open to amending our perception of invention. Who and what are the key players? And what do we consider valuable effects? That is, as I argue, we need to perceive digital inventing as choric. Now, what are doxa? Aristotle defines doxa as the given in discourse. We take doxa for granted, especially as it is inherited discourse. Doxa are the rhetorical material that get handed down and circulated through families and communities. Doxa preserve the status quo. We see doxa at work in everything from political arguments about American exceptionalism to times when a bro at the gym grunts, "No pain, no gain, bruh." Or even something like this. As Dana Anderson articulates, doxa are the things we think with rather than think about. Doxa take form in cliches and stereotypes, but they are just as often formless. They are the building blocks of the topoi, but the digital changes things. Ulmer and Rickert stress that choric invention is a kind of departure from topic invention. Ulmer distinguishes choric inventing by claiming that the topoi are abstract containers that must be replaced by chora if we are to work with new media in a receptive and lively way. Rickert is more generous. His theory of choric invention is that it reworks the fixed places of the topoi. However, I understand doxa as crucial agents in choric invention. The chora offers us a way to reflect on how discourse that seems one-dimensional can also be seen as electric. It is this oscillation that digital spaces has made more clear about rhetoric in general. While rhetoric has always been interested in such interplay, it's new media that exaggerates the possibilities of interplay to craft rhetorical effects. Effects such as what happens when seemingly stable doxa help comprise a digital work like a hashtag tweet. Hashtags are metadata mechanisms that make user-generated content searchable. Hashtags have few boundaries, no set media. They are written into book titles, materialized in hand gestures, which I will not do right now. They scroll across television shows and are stitched into clothes. For instance, during the Super Bowl commercials, I personally counted about 24 individual hashtags, but I probably missed some. We are clearly a society saturated in hashtags, offering us, among other things, the thrill of dual citizenship. Hashtags toggle between the virtual and the physical, shaping both spheres. Hashtags funnel and contour digital compositions, inspiring choric inventing perfect for digital interfaces, networked, networking, unsettled discursive encounters between machines, cultures, humans, bots, media, et al. Ultimately, the hashtag's purpose is to become viral, so they must be contagious. In their campaign to infect, the basis of the hashtag's rhetorical sensibility is duality. It is discourse that looks both ways, that enlivens as much as it is living itself. To understand how hashtags work, we must approach them with an acute awareness of their multiple registers. Hashtags are thus the epitome of the striking dimensionality that Richard Lanham calls permanently bistable textuality. We are always first looking at it and then through it. We understand the hashtag as a grammar and we think with it, but we must also imagine beyond it, imagining how it will eventually produce an effect. Putting all of this together, I want to turn our attention to two examples of hashtag activism, which will build a theory of choric invention that relies on noticing the doxa on their way toward bistability. These examples will show how doxa are the stagnant components that can become choric in digital environments. On August 9th, 2014, Michael Brown was shot to death by Darren Wilson. While Brown's death was recounted to the rest of the nation, many news corporations picked a photo of Brown to display while discussing updates. Here's the photo that news programs picked. In this photo, the camera is angled upwards toward Brown, who is looking down at it with a stolid countenance. His eyes are barely available to the reader. Brown's hand is raised in what could be interpreted as a peace sign, but many channels and websites interpreted this phatic gesture as evidence for gang affiliation. This particular representation angered the many people who were noticing similarities across the way media portray African American men. Consider the hooded photo of Trayvon Martin, or Time's elaborately darkened photo of O.J. Simpson. Or consider the differences in captioning news stories of troubled and haunted white suspects versus African American victims labeled as gang members or threatening. News media has a history of representing African American men as dangerous and thuggish. Hashtag If They Gun Me Down was created as a defiant response. The idea was that people of color would circulate the hashtags with two photos, one of which would pander to expectations about racial identities, while the other would offer an alternative. Here is an example from @dubj. Examining this hashtag's function exposes the doxa as resources whose generative potential gets activated by the fluid conditions of the digital. Here, the interaction between the two stereotypical images is fueling a kinetic relationship. I use the word kinetic here to evoke productive friction. @dubj is clearly thinking with hashtag If They Gun Me Down, which inspires him to juxtapose two photos that bespeak identity variations. He's telling his audience that he knows his position as an African American man conjures two stereotypical images, the African American man as thug, and the African American man as fulfilling the Caucasian success story. With his hashtag, however, he's literally wrenching possibility out of this dualism. The me in If They Gun Me Down already points to an identity that cannot be fully accounted for by either of these photos. Furthermore, the photo's visual compositions also complicate the normative stereotypes at play. @dubj is orchestrating an active-passive binary. Look at the distance used in each. The close confrontational nature of the left photo renders the stereotypical look threatening to the very people who believe it is a universal representation. Whereas in the photo on the right, the subject offers himself passively to the viewer, smiling at the camera. Just like with the photo of Michael Brown, the thug stereotype is confirmed by @dubj's hand gesture as he holds up two middle fingers. This image suggests that the stereotype of the thug is uncontrollable, running angry in the wild streets. And yet, the subject's expressive defiance of the frame dares the viewer to accuse him of anything, let alone of embodying a mere stereotype. Similarly, though the right-hand image idealizes the stereotype of the African-American man turned white, controlled through institutionalization, the layout implies that this stereotype is much too passive, too flat, to represent the complexities of an actual person. Both these images resist the stereotypes they are working within in order to suggest that identity is fluid for everyone. Moreover, doxa that presume to represent identities are here turning choric, inclusive of multiple meanings. Hashtag If They Gun Me Down shows how digital invention begins by thinking with both doxa and hashtags, responding to the continually molten space of social media. This hashtag is directly bridging the binary between the individual and the collective, as users of hashtag If They Gun Me Down must write individuality into the collective network in order to rebel against having to navigate dualism. Hashtag If They Gun Me Down proposes an invented stereotype about how identity actually takes place in the wrought interstices between doxa about race. This is an example of choric invention precisely because it is the birth of a beginning occurring because of a momentary and end-place concoction of doxa, a beginning that necessarily withdraws as the material gets repurposed and circulated. This tweet shows us that in the digital sphere, doxa are still our primary well for rhetorical invention. They are still the ideas we think with in order to begin composing. And here we are privy to a visualization that paints the complexity of the creative process in the electronic age. The If They Gun Me Down hashtag provides one layer of doxa while inspiring the addition of other doxa. And this layering marshals an ironic effect that creates new meaning. Such alchemy could not work without an accumulation, which must work with other material, including the hashtag and other doxa, in order to kickstart the choric engine. To throw into relief the first example, I have a hashtag that I read as not inspiring choric invention, which I think will help us understand the conditions necessary for something to become dynamic. I think we can all agree that the example of hashtag If They Gun Me Down was a really productive use of a hashtag, but we know that this doesn't always happen, right? In April 2014, around 276 Nigerian female students were abducted by an Islamist militant group, Boko Haram. In response, a global campaign attempted to apply viral forces to the situation, demanding that Nigerian authorities hashtag bring back our girls. Unfortunately, the hashtag campaign became an example of therapeutic slacktivism that mostly boosts the user's ethos of goodwill. To illustrate, here's an example of a tweet from two public figures, Thea Andrews and Kevin Frazier of The Insider, an American news entertainment show, a la Entertainment Tonight. While the hashtag we have looked at already complicates doxa that have overstayed their welcome, this tweet shows that sometimes, no matter what the hashtag was originally created to do, it can be made to do wildly different things. For instance, this tweet uses the kind of structure corporations co-opt to generate more kairotic buzz. They offer the opportunity to self-promote through one easy share. This tweet is demanding this. Insert yourself into the campaign and tweet at The Insider a photo of you, plus the appendage that just happens to be the reason for the photo in the first place. This capitalizes on the self-indulgent tendencies of social media users, and it also relies on ambiguity to affect circulation. The doxic element in this hashtag is the our girls portion, which stems from rhetoric that scaffolds harm done to women. In order to humanize female victims, our society insists on identifying women only in relation to men. The equation between a woman's worth and her relationship to men is a given that people continue to weave into texts. When only a single piece of doxa is involved in co-constructing a hashtag and its context, the hashtag suddenly awakens in the user's mind. Okay, cliched connections, such as linking the abducted Nigerian women to nondescript sisters or daughters. In other words, the user projects what is familiar to them into the indefinite moment. It is that uncritical projection that does not set into motion core convention. There is no intertextuality in this example that is working to produce the kind of core convention that will turn our girls into something complex and not at all simply ambiguous. Rather, the users, and in this case a particular network, will gladly read themselves into the hashtag just in time to repeat it as a one-dimensional creation. Mere social commerce gets built from these kinds of hashtags. Exhibit A. Yeah. While the example of hashtag if they gun me down can actually cause change, this hashtag merely seeks circulation through repetition. This use of hashtag bring back our girls wants social media users to repeat the thread rather than challenge the thread. This tweet wants to prescribe a telos for the hashtag. The other example we looked at mobilized because it worked with and through the rhetorical duality gained from handling multiple doxic elements. Here, there is only our girls, and by following their instructions to spread the word, our girls remains untouched. Is there potential here for the doxa? Yes, but that potential is not being untapped in this prescriptive, self-motivated, and repetitive network. Thus, if hashtags and doxa are to foster core convention, that is invention, that is guiding, generative, and oscillating, they must clash with other elements, thereby dancing with the fluctuating conditions of digital spaces while carving out more room for invention. Returning to Richard Lanham's observation about bistable textuality, he also broaches the question of decorum, which got me thinking about ethics. He claims that the oscillation that the digital word creates fosters a different implied ideal of decorum, both stylistic and behavioral. It is imperative that we understand circulating hashtags as an ethical choice. Though a hashtag text might seem like an individual project, it is actually a project that sends ripples throughout many networks, affecting just as many actors. So when I first wrote this paper, I was going to suggest that we might attend to Lanham's decorum by always trying to cultivate intertextuality in our digital works, thereby fostering core convention and avoiding doxic simplicity. However, that attempt at a solution assumes only a human agent acting in an exclusive social gathering of friends. Never mind the human's mood or the corporation that helped make the hashtag trend or the Twitter bot that ends up circulating it, or even the presenter who uses the tweet to discuss digital rhetoric. I do believe that attention to core conventing will help develop a more ethical attunement to digital spaces. However, I'm also aware that Plato conceived of the Cora in order to get us considering all that seems passive, that seems to occupy the third spaces for which we don't have language. So let us determine ethical responsibility in the vectors and relationships that allow for the digital spaces we digital rhetoricians are so invested in. Thinking in that more robust way about what ethical responsibility means will inform both our online practices and how we approach teaching digital media. As we digital rhetoricians continue to consider who we are and what we make during this symposium, I hope that we will also be considering how much good we can accomplish in the network of the classroom. Thank you.